Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe place to get real about sex. Whether you're a man, woman, single, or couple, this is the show for you. Because, well, sex matters. We are your hosts, Kevin Anthony and Céline Remy. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 83, and it's titled How to Fix a Sexless Marriage. So this is going to be fun, and I think it's going to be fun for a lot of reasons. One, of course, a lot of people actually have this problem, so they're going to be very interested in knowing how to fix this. But two, one of the things that you mentioned, Céline, was that neither you nor I have ever actually been in a sexless marriage. And so I think it's going to be really fascinating for us to sort of see a different perspective than what we've personally experienced.
Yes, absolutely. So we found a guest who has some experience, and not only does she have experience, she has solutions too for you. So we are super excited today because we have Candice Smith that is here with us today. Candice is an award-winning Harvard-educated couples intimacy consultant specializing in intimate communication. She co-founded Tango with her love and partner Luke and created Sexperiential Learning, a new kind of sex education for adults with a hands-on, pleasure-based curriculum in a box. That is juicy, that is sexy, and I'm super excited to welcome Candice to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. Well, Candice, so we kind of went on your site, we looked around, and we learned that you used to have bad sex when you grew up and you didn't know how to advocate for your pleasure. And basically now you have this company and you help people have better sex, deeper intimacy. And this got us so curious because we're like, how do you go from one place to the other? And we want to take you all on a journey to understand.
We're going back to the beginning to get at the root of how this all happened. So, and I think your story from when you were younger is probably the story that most of us had, right? So in your video when you're introducing Tango and sort of saying how you came up with this, one of the things you say is that as a young person growing up, you didn't really have any sex education. And so we've all had various levels of that. Like I didn't really have any sex education either, but Céline growing up in Europe actually did have sex education. So I'm curious, what was your sex education like growing up? What were you told? Who told it to you? Where did you get this stuff from?
Yeah, well, it was a don't ask, don't tell policy at home. Nobody wanted to talk about sex, and not really healthy intimacy either. I think I was a child of divorced parents. There were a lot of divorced family members living in my family. So I really didn't get the chance to see what healthy romantic intimacy looked like growing up, as well as sex. And so when I was in a private school, very, very small. Our class size was about 20 kids in total. And then when I went to public school, that was really where I think it was the 8th grade. I went to public school and started making new friends. And that was really where I was exposed to some of these conversations about sex and sexuality, but it was really based around peer conversations. So conversations with girlfriends, have you kissed a guy, and what is that like, and what are the expectations, and what are the bases, and all of those things. And then of course the internet, discovering pornography and learning a little bit more there, and starting to kind of download these different messages around what sex was supposed to be and how I was supposed to perform as a woman or as a girl, sexually. So
Candice, it really sounds like the experience you had growing up was very similar to what I had, because I went to a very small school originally, class size of like 20 people. It was basically forbidden to talk about sex there. And then I went to public school afterwards, and it was like a whole other world. But I think, as you probably realized, that's about the worst place to learn your sex education from.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So obviously you didn't learn a lot in school and growing up. So let's maybe jump one more step ahead. Now you're a young adult. How did this lack of education affect your early sexual experiences?
Well, I think one of the biggest messages that I learned was that my pleasure was shameful. It wasn't good to talk about masturbation, right? Masturbation was a shameful thing. It's something that people would laugh at. I always had to worry about how I looked. I always had to worry about how I sounded. I had to make sure that my partner's pleasure came first. And so getting some of these messages about pleasure and getting some of these messages that, I'll give you an example.
Oh, yes, please do.
If you turn a guy on, it's my responsibility to make sure that he has an orgasm. Mm-hmm. Because if a guy is turned on and he doesn't have an orgasm, he's going to get blue balls and he's going to be in pain. And so I don't want to be responsible for a guy being in pain. I have to make sure that I take care of that. So that being an expectation, I then, whether I was in the mood or not, if I was with a partner and I knew that they were turned on, I knew that I was going to have to follow through. Even if I was just teasing or flirting, if he got turned on, it was then my responsibility to make sure, whether I was in the mood or not, that he would orgasm.
And that puts a lot of pressure, right? I mean, it kind of takes the fun out of sex, or kind of remove some of the desire for it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it set me up pretty early on to feel like I had to perform. I was constantly being judged for my performance. I was constantly being judged for how I sounded. And it was always this feeling that I had to give pleasure and never receive pleasure. And obviously at that time I wasn't conceptualizing of it like this, like in terms of like my giving and receiving pleasure, but it was really just a matter of, is he feeling good? Did he finish? Those were my goals and those were my standards that I set for whether or not I was doing a good job, right? Sex became a job, and it became something that I had to do well, and I had to perform well to make sure that my partner was happy. So in thinking about those things and in prioritizing those things, pleasure became very deprioritized for me. My own experience, my own receiving of pleasure became something that I would just kind of push away. If a guy wanted to go down on me, I would say, no, you're fine. Don't worry about it. What are you going to get out of that anyways? You won't get any enjoyment out of that. So if you don't get enjoyment out of that, there's no reason. I mean, you and I are just going to be sitting there waiting for me to orgasm, which who knows if that's going to happen. And so then I'm just laying there thinking, well, how much time has passed? 3 minutes. Is that too long? 5 minutes. Is that too long? Am I making the right noises to make him feel like he's doing a good job? Am I doing the right things? Maybe it's too long now. Maybe he's getting bored of this. Maybe his tongue's getting tired. Sure. Okay, I'm just going to fake it now. I'm going to fake it right now. And hopefully I do the convincing noises and the convincing sounds to make sure that he's okay with it. And that became my sexual experience.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, the example that you just brought up is a big one. And if anybody's listened to this show long enough, you know that one of the number one things that we teach people is exactly not that. Like, don't do that. and by what I mean by that is that whole idea that just because you got turned on, especially as a guy, you got a boner for some reason, now you have to finish. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that's absolutely 100% wrong. But I'll give you just one, guys that are listening, that might change your idea about that, which is whatever pleasure you receive from that 3 to 5 minutes, that whole scenario that was just going on in Candice's head, that is nothing compared to the pleasure you could experience if you were to delay that gratification and take the experience into a much longer, much better experience. Right. So she should not be trying to get you off as quickly as she
Mhm.
can. That's not really her responsibility. And you should be enjoying the process of it all.
Process of pleasuring her. So I want to put something into the time frame here. So I'm imagining that we're talking about kind of the early on years of your sexual life here. And how does that kind of fit with you going to Harvard? Like, how do you go study sexuality, have a degree in Harvard, when basically you're having bad sex? Like, I'm kind of like trying to figure that one out.
So if sex wasn't that good, what made you decide to go study sex?
Usually people don't do that. You know, they will turn on porn, or I don't know, they'll do something else. They won't go to Harvard. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's something that I get pretty often. So something that I'm still getting used to talking about, and I think it's obviously, you know, these are the times to start having more of these conversations. But in my earliest sexual experiences, not knowing how to advocate for my pleasure, not knowing how to advocate for my yeses or my nos, because I didn't know what I wanted, and I expected my partner to lead. I was sexually assaulted in high school. And so it's something that I don't talk about as much, but it shook me very deeply, because even in my initial conceptualization of that experience, I thought it was my fault. You know, I thought that I was asking for it. I thought that I led him on. And, you know, I had found him attractive. And so that experience, I thought that was, even though I was not necessarily a willing participant, I told myself that I had brought that on. I had invited it. And so when I ended up going to Harvard, you know, I was still kind of struggling with this. I had told no one. I told absolutely nobody about what happened. And in going to school, I happened to find Introduction to Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. And I said, you know, this might be an interesting course to take. I don't know what it's about. I've never heard of this. And what I ended up learning in that initial introductory class changed my life. It changed the way that I look at the world. It changed the way that I understood my silence, the way that I understood consent, and power dynamics in relationships. And that was really where I just dove in. I said, you know what, I want to learn this more. And my family was like, oh God, no. Why?
You're going to Harvard. Do something like become a lawyer. Come on now.
Exactly. And I was like, no, I found my purpose. I don't know what it is yet, but this is calling to me. And so I continued to take more classes, and focusing in sexuality studies specifically. And that's really where I fell more into this field. But I will say, though, even in taking sexuality studies, you know, there's misconceptions when people hear that word. They think, oh, well, did you go to school to Harvard to learn how to give a better blowjob, or learn how to be better in bed or something? And it really had nothing to do with that. It really was about the theoretical application of sexuality, of consent, of power dynamics in relationships, domestic violence, and things like that. And so when it came to some of these topics, I was learning quite a lot, but I wasn't translating those things that I learned into how to speak up for myself. So I still had bad relationships. I still had bad sex. And I felt a lot of shame around that too. I felt an extra layer of shame, like, right, I'm a sexuality studies major, and I know all these things, and I'm a feminist now, and now I understand all these different things, but I still don't feel like I'm good in bed. I still have a lot of shame, and I still don't know how to advocate for myself. I still haven't healed from my assault. So it led me down a rabbit hole through most of my 20s, I would say, of experimentation, and I guess what I like to call my passion project of having to learn how to stand up for myself and advocate for myself intimately, and stand up and learn how to have a better relationship with pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's super powerful. And it's definitely not a story that is rare, right? We hear this type of story a lot. We hear of so many women and sometimes men where they've been assaulted and it messes things up, and then there's all these different emotions, and it's really difficult to move through them, and it kind of like it's a baggage that a lot of people carry, and they carry it in the bedroom, they carry it into everything they do, and it does make it hard. It does make it that life is less enjoyable in so many ways. Since we are here around kind of that pain subject, and before we go into more of the positive notes, I'm really curious about that place you were in where so you're saying, yeah, I'm studying sexuality. And so it's like, yeah, so many people want to do that, right? They read a book, they watch a movie, they do this, and they're like, okay, I'm reading about it. It still doesn't make it that you're good in bed or you know what to do. And you're in this place where you have a lot of the tools available, or knowledge, maybe knowledge, not that tools, but yet you're still experiencing like a sexless relationship. And I want to hear more about what happens. Like, how is it like to be in a sexless relationship?
Sure. So I had a number of obviously failed relationships early on in my 20s. Didn't really know how to ask for what I wanted. And so, and over time, I was becoming less and less intrigued by the idea of sex. I wasn't as excited by the thought of it. It still very much felt like a chore. And so when I entered into my first serious relationship in my mid-20s, I'd say I was 24. I very quickly got through the honeymoon stage with my partner, and I stopped wanting to be touched. And I think it all started for me when he brought up this issue that he found with my ability to orgasm. I wasn't orgasming fast enough. And so he put a voice to my fear that I had been holding on to, that, I'm not doing it fast enough. I'm not authentic. He was very much about like showing up authentically as your sexual self, but also performing at the same time. He had his own expectations of, what he felt he had done well with his previous partners. And he thought that should translate into my pleasure as well. And when it didn't, the only solution was that it was me. It had to be me, because I wasn't responding to things that had worked well with other partners. And I think that's obviously one of those myths that we carry with us is, if someone's good in bed, or if you're good in bed with one partner, then everyone else would automatically love what you do. And of course, that's not true. Everybody's body works differently and pleasure works differently for different people. And so in discovering that he felt I wasn't orgasming fast enough, I started to feel even more like I had to fake it, even more like I had to come to the table with something to show him that I was being authentic. And so I was trying so hard to authentically orgasm that it became this huge source of stress and frustration, to the point where I actually physically started feeling revulsion at the thought of him touching me. And it was, I can still remember it now. It's like a very visceral reaction. I would get goosebumps when he would touch my shoulder, because that was a trigger for me. I knew that if he touched my shoulder, it was going to lead to a neck massage, which was going to lead to just take clothes off, and he wants a blowjob, and then he expects this and he expects that, and then I have to orgasm for him, and I have to make sure that I'm doing all of these things as he expects, or I'm not showing up authentically and he's not going to be pleased. Again, with this thought of like his orgasm and my performance to please him being the measures of success. And so it just became the opposite of enjoyable. I would say that, like, it became so unenjoyable that I was literally physically repulsed by the idea of having sex.
Yeah, you know, honestly, Candice, you are our absolute client avatar. like the things that you went through are exactly what we help people with. And I bring that up simply because you are not alone. There are so many people. We spend so much time trying to educate people on these exact topics. For instance, the example that you just gave us, it's just another one of those big traps, right? Like, oh, I did good with these other women, so therefore you should be just fine. It must be you, right? Not only do those things not work for every woman, but the same things don't work for the same woman in the same day. You could make love in the morning and what you did worked great and she screamed in pleasure. Now you're having sex in the evening and it doesn't work, right? Because she's a woman and she's like water and she's flowing and she's changing. She needs different things at different times. Oh my, if I had a dime for every time I've heard people with that issue. So thank you so much for voicing that, because I think a lot of people listening to this can really resonate with it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think for myself, that was the final straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm.
Being in that situation and being like, I'm 24 and I feel like my body's broken.
Wow.
I'm 24 and I feel like I don't have any sexual desire.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that has such huge implications for the way that I saw myself, the way that I presented myself to other people, my confidence, my daily happiness, and my stress levels and depression, and all of those things can result from
not being well fucked.
Yeah. Let's just put it how it is, not being well fucked. So, but this is a great segue then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, all right, that's the straw that broke the camel's back. So how did that lead you to developing this new product that you have?
Like, and are there things that you tried, like you're like, okay, now that this is it, I have to do something? Like, what were the first steps you took to start to bring pleasure back, like in a way that was good for you?
Yeah. So I'm a nerd. I'm a self-professed nerd. When I have a problem, I don't know, I research it. And so in this particular case, I turned to the internet. I was doing a lot of reading about sexlessness, about lack of pleasure, about issues with libido, about how to have healthy relationships and how to speak to your partner when your partner doesn't understand and you keep trying to tell them over and over what your needs are. In a way that isn't causing argument or causing defensiveness or, hurting ego and things like that. And I think one of the first things that I learned is to shift my definition of sex and pleasure and foreplay. I think really shifting my definitions, and I'm a certified educator. After I graduated from Harvard, I ended up going and getting my master's in education, and definitions are very near and dear to my heart. And just defining what pleasure could look like and what pleasure should look like, I think for myself was one of the first places where I went, and identifying some of the patterns that weren't working for me in terms of how I was being touched or how I didn't want to be touched. And really just thinking clearly about what my yeses and nos were. I think I had been allowing myself to be led so much. I had submitted so much to what I thought my partner wanted that I didn't know what made me feel good. And so you can't speak up for yourself when you don't know what feels good. And so I started exploring my body more. I invested in some sex toys. I ended my relationship. Woohoo! And I started really intentionally prioritizing finding pleasure again and understanding what that looked like for myself. And along the way, I ended up getting into research around kink and BDSM, because as I mentioned, one of the things that I studied at Harvard was relationship power dynamics and consent. And I had always found it from an academic standpoint, I'd found it very fascinating that couples that, or partners that practice BDSM and play, they negotiate what they consent to. And they talk about openly what they want to do with each other. And I think that was revolutionary to me, because I had never talked with a partner about what we were going to do to each other. He just pushed my head a certain way, or he said, we're doing this, or he said that. And I would say, sure. Yeah, whatever you want. Right. And I would just kind of go with the flow, because I thought that was what was expected of me. I thought that not talking about sex was sexy. And letting the passion speak for itself, letting our bodies speak for themselves, when in reality, I discovered that was very different. And so I decided, when I started dating again, that I was going to experiment, and I was going to try some of these things that I found intriguing. And I found out very quickly that my body was not broken at all. It was all about mindset. And in those first experimentations, I think I practiced, I experimented with domination and submission, and I experimented being dominant, and I experimented with being submissive, and I talked about what I actually wanted. And it brought up this question of, what do I actually want? And I think for myself, when I end up speaking with other women, my clients who are in the same position, I ask them, we start with this question of, what do you want? And the first answer is, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Right? We never know. And we're not taught to think about what we want. We're just taught to react to what we think our partner wants. And so that for me was revolutionary.
So I love all of this, Candice. That's a fantastic journey. And I think it's going to speak to so many of our listeners. I've heard a version of this story like so many times, hundreds of times by now. So I know everyone can get a little piece in there that will resonate. And so what I would love for you to do is to share a little bit with our listeners more about the kits that you've created, and that can help them open up this communication and play with pleasure and explore, because I think this is really like, now it's like they're ready, they want that solution. Like, tell them a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. So fast forward a couple of years, right? So I've been reconnected to my body. I'm passion, and I know how to speak up for what I want. I've discovered how to advocate for myself, and have found healing, and have found joy, and have found ecstasy within that. And the more that you learn how to talk about sex and intimacy, the more that you get playful with it, right? There's a lot of play involved in negotiating what you want to do with someone. And there's a flirtation to it. And I learned that foreplay is not just the thing that you do immediately leading up to sex. It is the energy that you have with your partner that continually exists, right? And you can always play with that. And so as I got more into play myself, I started thinking about, what are the ways that we can teach other people how to find this magic, in the bedroom of communicating through play and finding playful passion. And as an educator, I had focused on something called experiential learning with my students. And it's just a fancy way of saying learning through experience, right? You learn through experience, you have a project, it's hands-on, you get your hands dirty, and then you learn from that, right? And it's one of the best ways that children learn. And it's the same with adults. We're all human, right? Our brains learn better when we get our hands dirty. And so I thought, what is more hands-on than sex, right? It's the most hands-on thing to do. And so if there's a breakdown in communication with people like myself, who have struggled, who have felt shame, who have felt a lack of passion, and don't know how to talk to their partner about it, one of the best ways to overcome the awkwardness of intimate communication, that initial awkwardness, is through play. And that's really where Tango came about, this idea of guiding couples to play together with curated games that come in a box and are delivered to your door. So that was really where Tango got started. And then I took all of my other learnings, with the negotiating consent and power dynamics and all of these other things, and kind of put them into the box disguised as games.
Yeah, and you have different theme for the box, because I know that for some people, they're like, oh, BDSM, I'm not interested in exploring the kinky. But then there's the presence box, or there's different ones that can resonate, so that wherever you are on that spectrum, you can just start to experiment with one or the other. There's even the option to be surprised for the very adventurous couple, right? Where it's like, give me a surprise tango.
Exactly.
I would recommend it.
Going to get in the box.
Yeah, and I would recommend for people that even if you don't think that you're into this particular one, that you should probably try it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would always recommend it. People ask me, what kit would you recommend? And I always say presence first, because I think it's a great introductory kit. It was actually the first kit that I created. Is about just being present and quieting that noise. I mean, I think the first story that I ended up telling you guys is about all of the noise that was going on in my head about the expectations for performance, and is he enjoying giving me pleasure, and when is too long, is he waiting too long for me to orgasm, right? And all of these things that we have going on in our lives, the hustle culture and the do, and the be turned on and answer emails, look at your phone, look at social media, all of these things keep us from being present, especially when it comes time to be vulnerable and receive pleasure, right? And give pleasure. These things are not about I mean, obviously there's action, there's movement, but these things are about being in the moment and being focused on the physical sensations, and enjoying with your partner. And so I think it's being present is a lesson that no matter where you are in your sexual journey, it is valuable to visit and revisit.
Absolutely. We did a talk where we had the different women in the room say like, hey, what's the number one thing that they find is most attractive in a man? And what they all wanted and found attractive was presence.
Yeah.
So if you're a guy and you're listening, you're like, I'm not sure if I get it, like get the kits and focus, like work on presence, like explore what that means. If you are interested in finding out more about the different kits, the Tango products, we have a link for you in the comments below, and you can explore all of Candice's like fantastic games to bring more pleasure and bring sex back to the relationship.
Absolutely. And we've got one last question for Candice.
We do. You want to ask it, Kevin?
I'll ask it this time. We've got a new sort of tradition here at the Love Lab podcast that when we interview somebody, we always finish with the same question, which is, what is your best sexual talent?
Ooh, what is my best sexual talent? That's a great question. I think for myself, and pardon my pause, I'm really, I want to give you a good answer here.
I hear the Jeopardy music in the background.
What is, no, kidding. You know, I know we were just talking about it, and it seems like such an easy segue, but I think my best sexual talent is my ability to be present with my partner and to get lost in the moment. I think it's something that I'm the most proud of. It's something that I have worked the hardest on in my sexual journey, is shutting off the noise and allowing myself to actually receive pleasure and be okay with it and not be ashamed of it. And so I think for myself, it's not a position. It's not an action. It is a mindset that I am most proud of, and I think is my best sexual talent that allows me to show up for and to really bond and connect with my partner.
Beautiful. Candice, if our listeners want to find more about you, where can they go to find more about you? And of course, there's the link directly, but I know there's tango.love and other things. Where can they find more about you, Candice?
Sure. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Tango Kit. We're actually easy to find on all three of those platforms. And if you actually want to connect with us individually, we're going to be creating a group for women to just discuss some of these taboo conversations with live chats that I'm going to be hosting. So just reach out on Facebook at The Tango Kit. And I'll get you into that group, and we can have some fun conversations about sex.
Awesome. Well, I would really want to thank you for coming on, and I love the conversation that we had today. And I always appreciate when we have a guest who what they share is so in line with what we do and what we teach. All these things that you're talking about are things that we try to help people with. And the funny thing is we don't always know when we get somebody on the show whether or not they're really going to be in alignment. Like, yeah, we can look at your website and stuff, but we don't really know what you're going to say when you get here. None of this is scripted. So it's always such a pleasure when somebody comes on who's educated and well-spoken, and the things that they're sharing with the world are exactly what we want to share with the world. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the work you're doing, and thank you for being here today and sharing your insights with our audience. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I appreciate your mission and everything that you guys are doing too. So thank you again for holding this space.
All right, everybody. That's all the time we have for this week, and we will see you next week. We hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this show, leave a comment and share it with your friends.
And if you want more, we have an entire digital library with the best sex tips and relationship advice at CelineRemy.com. That's CelineRemy.com. So join us in the Sex Vault to continue this adventure.
Thanks for listening.
And remember, you're amazing.